The sand beneath his feet wasn't sand the way we know it. It was crystalline, almost glass-like, and it hummed with a frequency he could feel in his bones. He stood on a shore, looking out at an ocean that glowed faintly purple under a sky with two suns, and he knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't Earth, or rather, it was Earth but so long ago that the planet itself was different, shaped by forces and civilizations that predated everything in our history books. When he opened his eyes from the regression and tried to tell the therapist what he had seen, the only words that came out were these: "We came first. Before Atlantis. Before everything you've heard about. We came first." His name was Daniel, and he had spent most of his adult life feeling like he did unbelong in this time period. Not in the romantic way some people talked about being born in the wrong era, wishing they lived in the 1920s or medieval times. Daniel's sense of displacement went deeper than that. He felt like he belonged in a different world entirely, a place that didn't exist anymore, a civilization that had been so thoroughly erased from history that not even myths remained of it. The feeling intensified whenever he was near large bodies of water or ancient stone structures. He would stand at the ocean and feel a grief so profound it brought him to tears, mourning something he couldn't name. He would visit archaeological sites and feel angry, frustrated that the history being presented was incomplete, that humanity's story went back so much further than anyone acknowledged. He tried to dismiss these feelings as overactive imagination, but they were too consistent, too visceral to ignore. Things escalated when Daniel was 31. He started having dreams of a world that seemed like fantasy but felt like memory. He saw vast cities made of materials that shouldn't be possible, structures that defied physics as he understood it. He saw people who looked human but weren't quite, their bodies more luminous, their eyes containing depths of awareness that went beyond anything he saw in people around him. And he saw technology that was so advanced it looked like magic, devices that worked with consciousness rather than mechanical processes, that shaped reality through intention and understanding of universal laws. But most disturbing were the dreams of destruction. He saw the world he loved being torn apart by forces he couldn't fully comprehend. He saw oceans rising to swallow the cities. He saw the ground splitting open. He saw the sky turning dark as massive amounts of dust and debris were thrown into the atmosphere. He saw his civilization dying, and he felt the grief and horror of watching everything he knew disappear. He would wake from these dreams, soaked in sweat, crying, his heart racing with trauma that didn't belong to this lifetime. A colleague at work noticed Daniel's distress and mentioned past life regression. She had done it years ago to explore a phobia that traditional therapy hadn't helped, and she found it transformative. Daniel was skeptical but also desperate to understand what was happening to him. The dreams were becoming more frequent and more intense, bleeding into his waking life, making it hard to function. So he found a regression therapist, a man named Dr. Elias, who specialized in what he called deep time regression, accessing memories from very ancient past lives. Dr. Elias explained during their initial consultation that most past life regressions took people back a few hundred or a few thousand years, 2 lifetimes in historical periods we have records of. But occasionally, people accessed memories from much further back, from civilizations that existed so long ago that no trace of them remained except in the soul memories of those who lived there. He said that Daniel's descriptions of his dreams suggested he might be accessing such memories from a time period well before recorded history. They scheduled a full regression session. Daniel arrived at Dr. Elias's office feeling a mix of anticipation and fear. Part of him wanted answers desperately. Another part was afraid of what he might discover. Afraid that the dreams were real memories and not just imagination. Dr. Elias's space was filled with crystals and stones, with images of ancient sites and sacred geometry. It felt like a place where unusual information would be welcome rather than dismissed. They began with a long conversation about Daniel's dreams and feelings. Dr. Elias asked detailed questions about the world Daniel was seeing, the technology, the people, the landscape. He took notes and nodded thoughtfully, saying that what Daniel described was consistent with accounts from other people who had accessed very ancient past lives. Then he explained the regression process, how he would guide Daniel into a deep trance state where his subconscious could access memories from across his soul's journey, focusing on the lifetime that was trying to come through in the dreams. The regression began with breathing exercises. Dr. Elias had Daniel use specific breath patterns that ancient traditions had used for altering consciousness, techniques designed to access deep memory. Then, he guided Daniel through progressive relaxation, releasing tension from every part of his body, allowing his awareness to expand beyond the limits of his current identity. Daniel felt himself sinking into an altered state, his thinking mind becoming quiet, a deeper part of himself rising to the surface. Dr. Elias counted Daniel backward through time, but instead of counting through recent centuries, he used a different approach. He had Daniel imagine moving through geological ages, through ice ages and warm periods, through times when the continents had different shapes, through epochs of Earth's history that stretched back hundreds of thousands of years. And with each suggestion, Daniel felt himself moving backward, watching the world change around him, going back to a time so ancient that modern humans didn't exist yet. When Dr. Elias asked Daniel to notice where his awareness had settled, Daniel found himself in the world from his dreams. He was standing on that crystalline shore, feeling that strange humming sand beneath his feet, looking out at the purple glowing ocean under the twin suns. Except now he understood this wasn't literally two suns, it was one sun, but the atmosphere was different enough that it appeared as a double refraction, creating the illusion of two light sources. The earth itself was different in this ancient time, younger, with air that had different composition, with continents in positions that wouldn't be recognizable to modern geographers. Dr. Elias asked him to look at himself, to notice his body. Daniel looked down and saw he was in a human form but different from his current body, taller, more slender, with skin that had a faint luminescence. His hands had longer fingers, his eyes saw colors and spectrums beyond normal human vision, and his body felt lighter, more responsive to thought and intention than physical bodies were in Daniel's current life. He was in a form that was adapted to this different Earth, this younger version of the planet. Dr. Elias asked his name. Daniel felt for it, and found something that translated roughly as Aratel, though the actual name was a harmonic frequency as much as a word. He asked what year it was, but the question didn't make sense in that context. They didn't measure time the way modern humans did. Instead, Daniel understood that this was approximately 200,000 years before his current time, give or take tens of thousands of years, a time so ancient that modern archaeology had no frame of reference for it. Dr. Elias asked Aratel to describe his civilization, his world, and the information flowed like Daniel was remembering something he had once known intimately. His people called themselves something that meant the first builders or those who shape, and they were among the earliest advanced civilizations to arise on Earth, not the first humans, but the first humans to develop high technology and complex society. They had evolved much earlier than mainstream science believed was possible, had developed in a world very different from the one modern humans would eventually inhabit. Their civilization was built on principles completely different from anything that would come later. They didn't separate technology from spirituality, didn't see consciousness and matter as different things. Everything they created was based on understanding the fundamental nature of reality, the way consciousness shaped energy, which shaped matter. Their buildings weren't constructed mechanically but grown using understanding of geometric patterns and frequencies. Their technology worked through harmony with natural laws rather than force against them. Aratel described the city where he lived. It was positioned near what would much later be called the Pacific Ocean, though the coastline and geography were completely different in his time. The city was vast, with structures that seemed to defy gravity, rising in elegant spirals and curves that no modern architect could replicate. The buildings were made of materials that his people had learned to create, substances that combined organic and crystalline properties that responded to thought and emotion, that could change properties based on need. The society was organized around knowledge and wisdom, rather than power or wealth. Those who understood the deepest principles of reality, who had developed their consciousness to perceive and work with subtle energies, were the teachers and guides. Everyone contributed to the collective well-being, but there was no coercion, no hierarchy in the modern sense. People did what they were naturally drawn to, what their soul's purpose inclined them toward, and the society functioned harmoniously because everyone was operating from their authentic calling. Dr. Elias asked what Aratel's role was in this civilization. Daniel felt the answer clearly. He was a record keeper and what might be translated as a dimensional navigator. His job was to document the knowledge his civilization had accumulated and also to work with portals and gateways that connected their world to other dimensions of reality. His people understood that physical reality was just one layer of existence, that there were other realms, other frequencies of reality that interpenetrated the physical world, and they had learned to consciously navigate between these dimensions. Aratel worked in what could be called a library, though it was far more than books and documents. It was a vast complex where knowledge was stored in crystals that could hold information as pure energy, where records existed as holographic imprints that could be accessed by consciousness. He and others like him maintained these records, ensured that the accumulated wisdom of their civilization was preserved for future generations. But there was something else, something more significant that Aratel was working on. Dr. Elias sensed there was a deeper layer to the memory and asked Aratel to show it. And Daniel saw that his civilization was facing a crisis. They had become aware, through their dimensional work, that a catastrophic event was approaching. The Earth itself was going to go through a massive transformation, a shift in its magnetic fields and geological structure that would essentially reset the planet's surface. What they had built would be destroyed. Their civilization would end. The knowledge had come gradually, through multiple sources. The dimensional navigators had accessed timeline information showing possible futures. The astronomers had calculated celestial alignments that suggested major upheaval. The Earth scientists had detected changes in the planet's core that indicated instability. All the information pointed to the same conclusion. Within their lifetime, possibly within years, their world would end. Aratel described the debates that raged through their society. Some wanted to use their technology to try to prevent the catastrophe, to somehow stabilize the planet and avoid the destruction. Others argued that the changes were part of natural cycles, that attempting to prevent them would cause even worse problems down the line. Still others focused on survival, on building shelters deep underground or finding ways to leave the planet entirely. But Aratel and a group of others had a different focus. They were working on preserving the knowledge. They understood that even if some of their people survived the catastrophe, the civilization itself would be lost. The survivors would be thrown back to much more primitive conditions, would lose access to the technology and understanding that had taken tens of thousands of years to develop. So Aratel's group was creating what they called seeds of knowledge, ways to encode their most important wisdom so that future civilizations, when they eventually arose, might be able to recover what was lost. Dr. Elias asked how they were encoding this knowledge. Aratel explained that they were using multiple methods. Some information was stored in crystals that would be buried in specific locations, programmed to be found by those who were ready for the information. Some was encoded in geometric structures, in ratios and proportions that would seem like simple aesthetic choices but that actually contained complex information for those who knew how to read them. And some was encoded directly into the human genetic structure, into what modern science would call junk DNA, information that would lie dormant for millennia, until humanity evolved enough to access it again. But the most important method was soul memory. Aratel and others agreed to reincarnate in future civilizations, to carry the knowledge forward through their own consciousness. They made agreements to return again and again, spreading across the timeline, ensuring that some echo of their wisdom would persist. They would forget, consciously, as all souls did when incarnating, but the knowledge would remain in their deepest memory, accessible to those who learned to reach for it. Dr. Elias asked Aratel to move forward, to show what happened as the catastrophe approached. The scene shifted, and Daniel saw Aratel working frantically in the record library. The signs were becoming undeniable. The earthquakes were increasing in frequency and intensity. The oceans were behaving strangely, pulling back from shores in some places and flooding over in others. The atmosphere was changing, the sky taking on unusual colors. They were running out of time. Aratel and his colleagues worked around the clock to finish encoding the knowledge. They selected what was most essential, what future humans would most need to know, the principles of working with consciousness and energy, the understanding of how reality was structured, the techniques for developing human potential beyond current limitations, the warnings about paths that led to destruction and guidance toward paths that led to flourishing. They encoded it all as best they could, knowing that much would be lost but hoping that enough would survive to make a difference. Dr. Elias asked if Aratel had family, personal relationships. Daniel felt a surge of emotion as the memory became personal rather than just historical. Yes, Aratel had a partner, someone whose name translated as Linera, whose role in their society was as a healer and consciousness guide. They had bonded decades earlier, were deeply connected on all levels, and were facing the end of their world together. They had made the agreement to find each other again in future incarnations, to support each other across time, recognizing each other by the resonance of their souls, even when their faces and names changed. Aratel also had students, younger members of their society, who were being trained in the record-keeping work. He felt responsible for them, wanted to ensure they understood the importance of what they were doing, that they carried forward the mission even if he didn't survive what was coming. He gathered them together in the final days, taught them everything he could, made them promise to remember and to seek each other out in future lives, to continue the work of preserving and eventually restoring the lost knowledge. And then it came. The catastrophe they had been preparing for. Dr. Ilias gently guided Daniel to experience what Aratel experienced, understanding that this would be difficult but necessary for the healing that came from fully remembering. Daniel felt the ground start to shake, not with individual tremors but with a sustained motion that wouldn't stop. Buildings that had stood for tens of thousands of years began to crack and collapse. The ocean pulled back from the shore, revealing the seafloor for miles, and Aratel knew what was coming next. The tsunami, when it arrived, was beyond anything imaginable. A wall of water hundreds of feet high, moving with impossible speed, carrying the power to obliterate everything in its path. Aratel and Lanera held each other as they watched it approach. Knowing there was no escape, no shelter that would protect them, they spoke their final words to each other, reaffirming their promise to find each other again, to love each other across incarnations, to continue their work in whatever forms and times they eventually inhabited. And then the water hit. The destruction was total and mercifully quick. Aratel's consciousness separated from his body almost instantly. The physical death happening so fast there was barely time to process it. But as his soul rose above his dying body, above the destroyed city, he saw the scope of what was happening. The entire civilization was being wiped away. The coastal cities went first, destroyed by tsunamis. The inland cities were buried by earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. The atmosphere filled with so much dust and ash that the temperature dropped drastically, killing plants and animals, making the planet nearly uninhabitable for those who initially survived. Aratel watched from his disembodied state as his world ended. Millions of souls releasing from their bodies, rising into the light, returning to the space between lives. The physical civilization completely erased, the buildings destroyed, the technology shattered, the records buried under miles of debris. Within days, it was as if their advanced civilization had never existed. The Earth itself was reset, prepared for new cycles of evolution, new civilizations that would arise, knowing nothing of what had come before. Dr. Elias guided Daniel to move into the between-life space, to see what happened to Aratel's soul after that death. Daniel found himself in the familiar realm of light and consciousness, surrounded by other souls from his civilization. There were guides there, beings of great wisdom who helped them process the trauma of watching their entire world destroyed. The guides explained that this was part of Earth's natural cycles, that civilizations rose and fell, that the planet periodically reset itself to maintain balance. But the guides also showed them that the work Aratel and others had done to preserve knowledge had succeeded. The seeds they had planted would eventually sprout. Future civilizations would discover the encoded information, would access the genetic memory, would feel drawn to the same truths that Aratel's people had understood. The destruction of the physical civilization didn't mean the wisdom was lost. It had been seeded into humanity's future, waiting for the right time to bloom again. The guides showed Aratel glimpses of what would come. They showed him Atlantis rising, thousands of years later. A civilization that would recover some but not all of the ancient knowledge, that would flourish for a time, before also being destroyed by catastrophe. They showed him Egypt, building monuments according to principles that echoed the older wisdom. They showed him civilizations across the planet, all of them carrying fragments of what had been lost, none of them having the complete picture, but all of them contributing to the gradual recovery of knowledge. And they showed him the future beyond his current incarnation as Daniel. They showed him that in Daniel's time, in the 21st century, humanity was approaching another critical juncture. They were rediscovering the ancient knowledge, piecing together the fragments, remembering what consciousness could do, what reality actually was, how to work with energy and intention. Daniel's lifetime was part of the great remembering. The recovery of wisdom that had been lost when Aratel's world ended 200,000 years ago. The guides explained that Aratel's soul had incarnated many times since that first civilization, each lifetime working to preserve and spread the knowledge, each incarnation planting more seeds, preparing humanity for the eventual awakening. Daniel was another link in that chain, another incarnation of the soul that had been Aristotle. And his dreams were not just memories, they were his soul trying to bring forward the knowledge he had worked so hard to preserve, trying to fulfill the mission he had taken on all those millennia ago. Dr. Elias asked if there was a specific message the guides wanted Daniel to carry back to his current life. The guides gathered around Aritel's soul, and their message was clear and urgent. The time was now. The seeds planted so long ago were ready to sprout. Humanity in Daniel's era was ready to recover the ancient wisdom, to remember what Aritel's civilization had known about consciousness and reality. But the recovery required people like Daniel to step forward, to share what they remembered, to help others access their own deep memory of what had been lost. The guides also warned that history could repeat itself. Daniel's civilization faced its own potential catastrophe. Environmental collapse driven by the same kind of ignorance that required civilizations to keep learning and relearning the same lessons. But this time, there was a chance to break the cycle. If enough people remembered, if enough souls activated the encoded knowledge, humanity could evolve beyond the pattern of building advanced civilizations only to destroy them. This time, they could build something that lasted, that worked in harmony with the planet rather than against it. Dr. Elias brought Daniel back to present consciousness slowly, grounding him carefully after such a profound experience. When Daniel opened his eyes, he was overwhelmed with emotion. The dreams made sense now. The grief and longing made sense. He had lost a world, had watched his civilization destroyed, had spent 200,000 years working to recover what was lost. And now, finally, in this lifetime, the work was approaching completion. In the weeks after the regression, Daniel's life changed dramatically. The dreams stopped being traumatic and became inspiring. Instead of just watching his old world die, he started receiving clear memories of the knowledge itself, the actual principles and understanding that Aritel had worked to preserve. He found himself knowing things he hadn't consciously learned, having insights about consciousness and energy that seemed to come from nowhere but that he recognized as ancient memory. He started sharing what he was remembering, carefully at first and then more openly. He wrote about the civilization before Atlantis, the first builders who had developed high technology so long ago that no physical trace remained. He described their understanding of consciousness and reality, their methods of working with energy, their harmonious way of organizing society. Some people dismissed him as having an overactive imagination, but others resonated deeply, felt their own ancient memories stirring, recognized truth in what he was saying. He also found others who had incarnated from the same civilization. They recognized each other instantly, felt the soul bond that transcended this one lifetime. Some of them had been his colleagues in the record library. Some had been his students. And one, a woman he met at a conference about consciousness, was Linera, his ancient partner. They recognized each other the moment their eyes met, felt the same soul connection they had shared 200,000 years ago when they had held each other as their world ended. They didn't try to recreate the relationship they had once had. They were different people now, with different lives, but they supported each other in the work of remembering and sharing the ancient knowledge. They collaborated on projects to help others access their own deep memory. They created communities where people could explore these ancient connections safely. They became bridges between the lost civilization and the emerging future, helping humanity remember what it had forgotten. Daniel understood now why he had felt so displaced in this current time. Part of his soul had never fully left that ancient world, had remained connected to the knowledge and the mission even across 200,000 years and countless incarnations. But now, finally, he could integrate both timelines. He could be fully present in his current life while also honoring the ancient part of himself that was Eret. He could carry forward the work without being lost in nostalgia for what was gone. And he carried a message that grew more urgent as he watched current civilization approaching its own potential collapse. We came first, yes, but coming first didn't mean being better or more advanced in some absolute sense. It meant being the first to learn certain lessons, to make certain mistakes, to discover certain truths, and all of that learning had been preserved, encoded, seeded into humanity's future. If modern humans could access that ancient wisdom, could remember what the first builders knew about living in harmony with consciousness and nature, they could avoid repeating the cycle of rise and catastrophic fall. Subscribe to access the ancient knowledge your soul has been carrying across countless lifetimes.